As an artist who began doing art criticism, I still write about artists like John Chamberlain. My most recent article was John Chamberlain, conceptual artist. So as an art critic, which I occasionally am, I have to say Tracy Eamon's work is just getting better and better as she gets older. It's all about domestic humor. It's very funny, and for me, the criteria for art is humor. My heroes were An Kawara and Stanley Brown, dealing with anarchistic humor. I was visited by our art language, and later, unfortunately, knew Joseph Kasut. That the work about philosophy, to me, is close to being bullshit. So you'll see a lot of humor in my work. All my work is hybrid. When I first got into art, I had a gallery that was a vanity gallery. Friends of mine wanted me to start. And I did the first one-man show of Saul LeWitt, who had a big influence on me. Flavin, Smithson, and Judd were in group shows I did. But my interest was always magazine culture. Sure, I read Sounds and M&E. I wanted to be a writer, and I found rock criticism was a continuation of literary criticism, especially Leslie Fiedler. I was deeply influenced also by science fiction, Philip K. Dick, but also Brian Aldiss, who wrote a book called Cryptozoic, about time going backwards. I've gone through a lot of different periods of my work. It's always been a hybrid. My pieces for magazine pages, Detumescence, Side Effects, Common Drugs, which was influenced by Mother's Little Helper by the Rolling Stones, by Schema, which was oversimplified by Kasut, who, by the way, falsified all his work in terms of dates. But I got out of that area because I was doing magazine pages because it was a time in the 60s when you had paper dresses and everything was disposable. So we artists had a fantasy that we could destroy value by making things disposable. Carl Landry had his bricks. Dan Flavin wanted the fluorescent lights to go back to the hardware store. And I thought if I did things, and Lichtenstein wanted to destroy value by having cheap printed matter in paintings. But it didn't work. So what I did was I put things back into magazines. They were not meant to be done as art, but they were a hybrid between poetry, art criticism, and maybe proto-conceptual art. But all the work I've done has been a hybrid. So what I'm going to introduce you here to, I'm going to introduce you to work of my later years. By the way, I'm Jewish, and Einstein had a book called Out of My Later Years. So this is work from the later years. I've always loved architecture. Homes for America was actually not a sociological critique. It was just the opposite. It was a celebration of petite bourgeois culture, Italian Americans in New Jersey. I feel, in a way, I really relate to the work of T.J. Clark, who said the petite bourgeois or the revolutionary class, people who are upper lower class trying to become lower middle class. And as a Jewish guy growing up in New Jersey, I think Jewish people are very uptight. So I loved Italian Americans. The work is misunderstood as sociological. And these pavilions are actually quasi-functional. The work you have here didn't quite make it, but a later version became Café Bravo, which is actually architecture. So the idea of quasi-functionality really comes from one source, Russian constructivism. Saul LeWitt and Dan Flavin were guards in a big Russian constructivist show in MoMA. The work I'm going to show here actually begins with a project I did in 78. After doing this piece in Ambiente show, two audiences, two spaces, two audiences, a public space, two audiences, I decided it was a piece in the show Ambiente, but it was actually a room that was divided in half with thick glass, and one room had a mirror, and the other side was just a white wall. And people would go back inside. It's like a show. See, I think the Venice Biennale was like a showcase for the #1 artists of that country. But here I wanted the showcase to be involving the audience. They're in the place of the art object, looking at each other, and they can go back and forth. But I had a critique of that work. The white wall made it into a white cube, and I didn't want my work to be about the white cube. So I decided to do a series of models, architecture models. I'd seen actually a show in Leo Castelli Gallery of New York 5 architects like Peter Eisenman doing architecture models. So I said, why can't an artist do architecture models? They were both somewhere between art and architecture. So I had a friend, Mark Francis, who was actually the chief curator at Oxford Museum of Modern Art, and I presented. I was living in Brixton Hill, and I found an architecture student, and I did 10 different models, architecture models. One, you know, is alteration in a suburban house. I also did one, a clinic for a suburban house. And the work was either fantasies about situations in suburbia or work that was between sculpture and pavilion. And actually the ones that were, I thought architects do models as propaganda. First, some are fantasies and some are propaganda to get things done. So the works between art and architecture were realized 2 years later. So I want to put on right now the first, which was a sculpture pavilion for Argonne. So this all begins in Oxford. Actually, it was the #1 museum, I think in England at the time. This is sited actually in a physics nuclear laboratory outside of Chicago. It's a very solid oriented because I showed solid, but it's also very cubistic. I have panels that are just glass, the area that's open, and then mirror against mirror on either side. The shadowing is very important. And here I did it again for Modern and Musette in another version. I'm thinking maybe we can have...
Sorry, volume coming down.
This is in a show in Modern and Musette that Saul LeWitt did, dedicated to his great lost love, Eva Hesse. And it's put on, because of Sweden, I used a sauna wood flooring. With the shadowing, you can see it's very cubistic. Of course, the New York 5, Eisenman and people like that were interested in cubism. My pieces are always they're non-monumental. They usually have rooms for people, space for about 2 or 3 people inside and outside. And later my work has a lot to do with people gazing on the inside and the outside at the same time. There's a relationship between the Soundspeak Pavilion of Rietveld. Of course, this piece is easy to take apart because museums usually do things on a temporary basis. I'm the opposite of Richard Serra, although I have to say Richard was a friend of mine when he came to New York. My work is non-monumental. Maybe you could see it as like a playground situation, mostly for children. I always push my work as being for children's play and fun, and a photo opportunity for parents. Now I'm going to show the Hart Pavilion. This is a later work of mine. I was very influenced by Oldenburg's monuments. Actually, I was in a show. We won't put it on yet. It was in Carnegie International, and I was the last person in the exhibition, but there was an empty lobby. And I realized the most important thing about museums, because I hate institutional critique, is that lobbies are romantic pickup places. So in the lobby of this empty modernist building, I did a Hart Pavilion. Of course, it was in Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh is a tough steel city. Andy Warhol hated it because he was afraid of steel workers, but in fact they like Hallmark cards. So something sentimental and something that would activate the lobby. I think museums, lobbies, gift shops, elevators, and even toilets are quite important. They're social spaces. So this is, I had a collector who wanted the same piece. I never do additions, so I did a variation. This is in her backyard. And we'll put it on right now. It's near the barbecue pit, the swimming pool, and kind of picnic-like tables. Her husband had just died, so I sited it so she could look out the window of her bedroom and see the piece as a heart. The material I'm using now is two-way mirror glass. Two-way mirror glass was first introduced in America in the late 70s because of Jimmy Carter. Yes, he was the first ecologically involved political figure. Because of the oil crisis, he said we should have we should use solar power, and also to cut down air conditioning costs in hot places like Los Angeles. Two-way mirror glass reflects on the outside. It's a mirror, and it reflects the sunlight. And inside it becomes cool. Also, it becomes the first beginning of surveillance because it's used as one-way mirror. You can see from the inside, not be seen on the outside. But I think for corporations, it was an alibi because they show the sky. So they identify, the corporation identifies itself with the environment and the sky. When I use two-way mirror glasses, it's actually to be more like a heterotopia. In other words, a pleasure situation where you could lie down inside and outside. But this is one of the first pieces where I use curved material. I use slate because in suburban parts of New Jersey, where I'm from, or Pennsylvania, slate is very important. I also one of the panels, unlike the original Carnegie International, is perforated metal. I picked up that idea of using perforated metal from the great Japanese architect Shinohara, also used by Itsuko Hasegawa, one of my favorite Japanese woman architects. So this is a side with the perforated metal. I'm sorry about the quality of these videos. I don't take care of them. There's copies of copies of copies. But as we get on in the lecture, they're almost brand new. It's very psychedelic. Yes, I did use marijuana and hashish. I think I got very involved with Oldenburg because his monuments always are symbolic. You can see immediately how landscape is important. This is another piece that's very symbolic. I was invited to do a piece in a castle, in a castle in Austria. I'm Jewish, and Austrians claim they didn't have a problem during the Nazi period. So this is in a moat area, so that's why I use water. It's the Star of David. You can see it actually from the drawbridge, from the bridge, and you look down. It looks like it's a Jewish star, but the owner, who's a leading expert on Kiesler, said no, it's a Masonic symbol. What I like in this piece is. It's in a kind of remote area of Austria, and kids in the neighborhood, because these are rich collectors, you can put your feet in the water. Also, in Cecil D. DeMille films about the Bible, Jesus could walk on the water. I actually tried that myself in Israel. It didn't work. Oh, we can turn it up a little bit.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm. In Vienna, openings are very uptight. Mm-hmm.
The sun is coming out.
Notice I focus on the little girl. I think Maurice Chauvier had a song, thank goodness for little girl, thank God for little girls. They seem to be the biggest fans of my work. No, it's thank God for God for little girls that grow up to be big girls. The use of perforated metal, of this kind of grid, is a way of walking on the water. But actually, it's the one thing I picked up from a work of Daniel Buren, the Palais Royal piece. Also, I use industrial setting materials. Two-way mirror glass is used for office buildings, and that grid often goes over subways in New York. These are kids from the neighborhood. When I look at this video, it reminds me of Tarkovsky's film Solaris. So I'm using water very unconsciously. It's another reflecting item. So the next piece is the heart. This is a piece I did in Norway about 10 years ago. Local communities in isolated parts of Norway got money to have art projects. The government is socialist, believes in education for children, and also very much involved with getting tourism up to remote areas. So this piece was a triangle, curved, one side curved, the other two sides straight. You can actually walk inside, but I don't have good shots of the inside. I sited it on a fjord, so it could be seen by it's like a lighthouse by ships. One of my heroes is actually Bierstadt and Church and Thomas Cole and Church used to go. They're called the Luminists. Flavin and Ed Ruscha were very involved with Bierstadt. My work has a lot to do with light, and of course the light of Scandinavia is pretty important for my work. It has a ceiling, and when it rains, people go inside. They actually call it the shower, the shower stall. It's now a tourist attraction because it's very warm. The Gulf Stream current goes up that side of Norway, and it becomes a real big tourist attraction. Seeing all the work, all the different works. Tony Craig has a piece. Norway is very scenic, loved by British tourists. In fact, when I saw the Glacier Museum by Sverre Fenn, sitting in the cafe were some old English people, and they said, I heard a conversation. One old guy said, I met her actually in Victoria. I met your wife in Victoria. That's British Columbia, near Vancouver. I think we'll show this even though it's not on their list of things. This is a piece I did, because these are very short things. This is a piece I did for the show called Sculpture, organized by Casper Koenig in Munster. Again, it relates to the city plan because the city is a Roman plan, very circular. So I made a kind of pavilion that related to the city plan. One side is curved and the other two units make a parallelogram. I got the idea actually when I went to the Stedelijk and I saw a work of my hero, Robert Mangold, the painter. And yes, I take ideas from paintings I see, of artists I admire. Of course, Germany, everybody has bicycles, so you can see they have bicycle helmets. This guy with the long, strange long hair, he's obviously a German local. They have these strange beards. But it's a country that loves art. Particularly Jewish artists like me. Oh, these are Japanese tourists who you don't see anymore in England. They're all only Chinese now. Okay, why don't we just cut this? And the next video is actually a piece I did for the Dia Foundation. The Dia Foundation was a foundation set up by Heinrich Friedrich for very big New Age artists like Turrell, whose work I dislike. A great artist like Walter de Maria, who was not able to do anything except for one work every 20 years. I was invited to be in the Dia by Dan Flavin. I turned them down. For psychological reasons, I thought I'd be isolated, I might become mentally ill, and also because I'm a populist. And the idea of the great monumental work of art that Heiner had, based on Ludwig II, supporting Wagner, is simply not my cup of tea. So when they got rid of Heinrich Friedrich, because he was actually buying up these Soho properties, putting in works of art, and becoming non-profit institutions, he was investing in the real estate. So he was divested of his influence. And a friend of mine, Caspar Koenig, along with 3 other people he selected, made a panel that selected me as a kind of underground, non-establishment artist. The Dia Foundation was an area that was derelict. Now it's become the Chelsea art world, and I didn't want to do something inside, because I needed outdoor sunlight, because my work with 2A mirror glass involves the change in between reflectiveness and transparency as the sun changes. I needed to be outdoors, and I wanted it to be about the city plan, so I selected the roof, which wasn't being used. I wanted the piece to be similar to a New York City situation, where the roof is either a slum roof or a penthouse roof, depending what part of New York you live in. I had a model for a form that was a cylinder surrounded by a cube, both 2A mirror glass. To me, that was putting together the Baroque, because the cylinder distorts concave and convexly, like a Van Eyck, that was Baroque. As you move around, you see distortions. On the inside of the cube, in this piece, in the inside of the cylinder, children can see themselves, boys can see themselves giant like Supermen, and on the other side, on the convex surface, women who are fat see themselves as thin. And that's actually this use of 2A mirror cylinder comes from a film I did called Body Press. So I went out of films and got into a kind of architecture situation. The cube represents Renaissance perspective, and it's also the grid of New York City. So let's put the video on. Oh, it's already on?
But you've narrated it very well.
Well, no, there's a lot more to it. The boardwalk material is because I thought Battery Park City would be coming up the Hudson. I'd read Delirious New York by Rem Koolhaas. I used rubber matting on the side. It was like playgrounds. And my work was really to be about the 1970s alternative space combined with the 1980s corporate atrium. You see, all the work that was being done, and still being done by people like Leon Gillick or Harry Pardo, was to make a fantasy idea of the 60s or 70s. I wanted to relate the 70s and the 80s together, which Walter Benjamin says is very necessary, because you have fantasy ideas about a decade of the 60s to get away from the 90s. So in a way, I'm joining the two, and there was a tool shed which I turned into a coffee bar and videotheque where you could see 1970s videos. We're not going to see this. The idea really was to change the Dia. In other words, and also it's about the city plan. All my work is about the city plan. I got that from Saul LeWitt, who worked for IMP, and his work has a lot to do with De Chirico. So I believe architecture is not a monument. It's really about relating to the city plan. Certainly Aldo Rossi was an influence. But this idea of the work of architecture as kind of monumental sculpture to me is absolute nonsense. It has to have a function, and the videotheque was both a videotheque and a coffee bar. The coffee bar coming from the IBM atrium. So all these things came together. Also, the rubber matting is good because kids could fall down, fall on it. I thought it would be open during the summer so you could smoke marijuana like you do on slum roofs. That didn't happen, but I also elevated it because I had to go above the skylights that they needed for the inside. The work was a success. Of course, I didn't make any money on it. I just wanted to change the idea. It worked for at least 10 years. Now the piece is gone. Just like the next work I'll show, the Waterloo Sunset, the Hayward Gallery, that's also being taken down. The idea is really to change the function of the museum. I'm not against museums, though. I really think they're quite important, socially, aesthetically, and also as a way to look. Cafes are very important. Certainly it's true here. So the next work I'm going to show, actually after the Northscape, we should have continued with the Northscape because we have the Waterloo Sunset.
Do you want me to go back?
Yes.
Okay. You'll have to bear with me. It might take a minute.
Okay. Oh, no, sorry, I'm wrong. The next work is two-way mirror. No, it's a two-way
Hedge labyrinth.
labyrinth. And I guess the Northscape will repeat itself.
Yeah.
So this is a piece, in the 80s I did a lot of work in France. Socialist government created FROCs, regional art associations, because they wanted to regionalize art. They created them actually in parks, historical parks. So I went back to historical landscape architecture to make work. This work, it was actually designed, it was supposed to be for Stuttgart International Garden Year. Every 3 years, every 2 years in Germany, one city is designated as International Garden Year. They hire young landscape architects to redefine the city's parks. And there's a garden show where you could buy seeds, lawnmowers, and other things, and plants. And they won meeting places that were designed by artists. I designed for this a skateboard pavilion, which was never realized in '89, and also the two-way mirror hedge labyrinth. The work was never realized. Finally, it was realized by a collector in La Jolla, California. The labyrinth is pretty important because it goes back to English garden, Baroque gardens, and also the very edge of suburban houses have a hedge to define the property line. Let's turn it up, the sound up, and I'll explain it. So this is a version in La Jolla, which is a suburb of San Diego.
So it's about landscape architecture, redefining the city, and inside this redefined park area are garden shows. So people who are suburban garden owners can come and shop for flowers, seeds.
What I like about the hedge is in contrast with two-way mirror glass, the hedge is opaque from a distance, and when you get in close, it's transparent. Whereas the two-way mirror is very ambiguous about whether it's transparent or reflective.
Where the hedges define property lines, public and private, boundary lines with Baroque, labyrinth gardens, and English garden, Baroque gardens. I find the labyrinth is very important not only for hedges, but it defines the idea of the city. Because the city is like a labyrinth, right angle.
This is a Mexican gardener trying to start his power mower.
The kind of virtual space. The hedges should be semi-opaque, so from a distance you can't see through them, but they're transparent when you get closer. Just the opposite of two-way mirror, which is both transparent and reflective and shifting at every moment. The two-way mirror reflects people on either side, lost in the labyrinth. So you become lost in a labyrinth of virtual reality. The two-way mirror also is emblematic of the center of the city. It seems to always have an office building which is two-way mirror.
So I'm trying to define the piece as being about the center of the city, the two-way mirror glass, and the edge of the city, which is the labyrinth of the suburban house. I mean the hedge of the suburban house, the property line. Again, my work is about the city plan. But I really got into that through Silhouette, who I showed. I gave his first one-man show. He worked for IMPay, and IMPay did grids. As I said, he was very involved with De Chirico, who did the city plan of Torino. I designed this piece for the collector who had a young girl, a young daughter, and she used to use the swing. So if it was Richard Serra, he would put the piece right in the center, but I wanted us to continue the property line with the hedges and be from the point of view of the girl on the swing. And now we're going to probably repeat the Northscape because I've been making a few mistakes, which I've corrected. I think the next one is Northscape, and then we'll have my Waterloo Sunset piece.
We can skip Northscape if you
Oh,
want.
you just skip it, yes.
We have the technology.
Hmm?
We'll take a minute, so if you want to set it up, go for it.
Well, what happened with the Waterloo Sunset was I designed. See, I have a theory about museums. I think every 10 years they change. In the 80s, all the museums in France were gardens. And what people would do on weekends is they take the kids in a car, camp out, and then on Saturday and on Sunday they would see the work in the gardens. This was very much about the French socialist idea of regionalizing art. In the 90s, everything was about the education program. So I designed the girls' makeup room and also children's daycare center with CD-ROM, cartoon, and computer, where children could actually entertain themselves and educate themselves. In the lobby, where the parents would see the big shows upstairs. They might be not suitable for children to see.
We're all set now. Shall we
Okay.
play?
Yes. So I was asked by Susan Bradis of Hayward Gallery to do something that was like a cafe, because she's seen my cafe actually at the Zia Foundation and also Cafe Bravo. I decided to do something that was taking the children's daycare center a little bit further, and then we can just. This is a promotional video they made. It also shows how I work with an architect. She selected a very good architect for me to work with. Not a big star architect, but a guy who I really liked a lot from Manchester because we had the same interest in rock music, Manchester rock and roll. And it was a total collaboration. I worked with about 7 people on this because I believe that architecture is a team situation.
Let the sound.
Yes, sound for everything. And I shall be silent.
In order for Hayward to enhance visitors' experiences beyond its reputation for its internationally acclaimed gallery spaces, it needs to address visitors' expectations. In 2002, the decision was made to give the entrance a welcoming facelift. While the impetus for this foyer extension was rooted in a functional brief to improve facilities and access, it was driven by the Hayward's commitment to artistic innovation, and the decision was made to involve an artist from the outset. Dan Graham, an American artist famous for his two-way mirror glass pavilions, was the choice of Hayward's director, Susan Furliger-Brades.
I thought of Dan first for a number of reasons. He had done Cafe Bravo at Kunstwerke in Berlin, and I knew that the way in which people interacted with his work was important to him. His work reaches out to people, whether because they're engaging with its reflections or they're playing on the video screens that he often provides.
Once Dan had accepted the Hayward's invitation, the next step was to find an architectural firm to collaborate with him.
Luckily for us, we found the practice of Howard Tompkins. Graham Howard had some incredibly important credentials. He, like Dan Graham, was interested in the ball, joy division, the buzzcocks, and they had codependent astrological signs.
Well,
very important to Dan, given his interest in anthropology.
he's from Manchester, and I realized she made a mistake. I don't like the buzzcocks.
Their partnership proved to be ideal, and they set about designing the new facade, which includes a double-height glass foyer, a new cafe, a lift for disabled access, and the steam centrifuge.
So instead of just the main piece, I also designed the elevator, the staircase. The use of perforated metal is from the great architect, Japanese architect Shinohara, and the woman architect Izuko Hasegawa. I've been using perforated metal for a long time in my work. It's also a cliche of chairs that you see in train stations, the use of perforated metal. So actually I pick up all the cliches of the modern city and reuse them.
English art, teacup art. So he's trying not to be that English, but also wanted him to see architects often overdo the structure, whereas he understands that it's the mirror quality that's more important.
Dan obviously had an idea about what pavilion he wanted to put on the roof, and where we came in was to try and see what the boundaries of that intervention might be. Where the pavilion stopped and started, and where the other things like the lift and the staircase interfaced with the pavilion. So when the form of the ellipse began to evolve and a decision was taken that it should be an elliptical form, we then adapted what was going next to it to accommodate that. So there was this conversation of how the two things should look, whether they should look identical, whether they should have...
Well, the reason I selected the ellipse is because from that vantage point you could see the city, in other words the financial district. And in the 80s and 90s all the corporations started using ellipses. I think in the phrase of George Herbert Bush, the father of George W. Bush, the corporations wanted to project a kinder and gentler facade. So the ellipse is much kinder than these kind of neo-30s, neo-fascist kind of triangles.
It's always a surveillance situation. It's always reflective on the outside, and from the inside you can see through.
See, my work is about intersubjectivity. It's about people perceiving each other as they're perceived by other people. That really comes from when I read Jean-Paul Sartre when I was 14. And the Lacan mirror stage actually comes from Sartre. It's about the ego being formed when a child sees itself being seen by somebody who they see. In other words, so my work is about intersubjectivity and about the spectator, rather the object. And here, and also designing this, as you'll see, this work as a place where children can look at cartoons or arts council videos, and also it could be used for education purposes. In other words, for lectures and education things. It's multi-purpose, but basically it's also free. The Hayward Gallery, you don't have to charge money for it. You can just come from the walk on the Thames and use it.
When does a building become a piece of art, and when does a piece of art become a building? It's very ambiguous. I think it's very difficult for architects to work at that, really. Artists are much more au fait, I think, with working with ambiguity and contradictions, differences between inside and outside, whereas architects want sort of clear boundaries, clear divisions about what things are doing. That approach has impacted on the way we design the other part of the building. And I think that the two now work together as complementary elements.
The reason I got into architecture was because my first work was about the city plan. Homes for America was not about the white view, which I thought was a simplistic idea, but about the city plan of New York. I was influenced by my friend Saul DeWitt, who worked for I.M. Pei, and his grids were the city plan of New York as a grid. Dia Foundation is also about the city plan. That's my hobby, two hobbies, writing about rock music and visiting architecture. I'm an architectural tourist.
Dan Graham conceived the pavilion as a drop-in centre for children and old people, and a place where they could come and watch cartoons.
There's two kinds of cartoons. There's classic cartoons for old people, Mickey Mouse and Fritz the Cat, and also I updated it to Powerpuff Girls and things that little girls or children would like. And then I also added Arts Council videos. So Tracy Eamons, why it didn't become a dancer was featured. But it's very interesting. Teenage boys, Rodney Graham saw the teenage boys can be looking at cartoons, and then suddenly they could see Tracy Eamons' early sexual experience video. And after this, there's a video I shot myself of the piece actually working. Well, actually, I was director. I found a student of mine who's very good with camera. I paid her ticket to London. I have to admit, she stayed in a cheap hotel near Paddington, and I paid her in food. And also, I bought her a great camera. There's 6 monitors, which are computers that you can touch. Computer screens you can touch to change the program. The very important thing was every detail was done. The chairs rotate, so boys can rotate on the chair and have fun. The lighting was very important, and also I used this rubber matting that I used for the Dia Foundation piece. And also there's a terrace outside. You see, when I do quasi-architecture, detailing is very important. And this took actually months and months to refine. Unfortunately, it's being taken down now. The new director, Ralph Rugoff, always disliked my work. He's an American. He doesn't really know my work. And also, he's trying to make space for trendy things. But of course, if you've been reading the newspapers, it's turning into a shopping mall anyway. That's how they're going to survive, keep it survive. But I think actually Ralph just didn't like the fact that the work was done by his predecessor. Susan Brady was also an American from Brooklyn, but she was able to get so much money for this project by cutting through the class structure. I remember there was a Texas woman who had bought a lot of Judds, who was now living with a British financier from London, and we raised money very quickly. But like all good things, it won't exist anymore. No, nobody wants it. I'm sure they put a big Leon Gillick there because he's very trendy. Also, my favorite architects, Atelier Bow Wow, they featured them in a group show, in some kind of group show. I guess the key word is trendy. Make sure the sound is up.
Yep.
Okay. I called the piece "Water the Sunset" for the Hayward Gallery, and somebody who was working, Emma Mahoney, who was working as assistant curator, made sure Ray Davis came. So I sat next to my hero, Ray Davis, at the dinner. It was actually Tacita Dean, who I kind of discovered and promoted, who made sure I sat next to Ray Davis. We had a very good conversation about music. He told me Mick Ronson had died, and we talked about Tommy James and the Shondells, and Neil Diamond, who he loves. It was one of the high points of my life, because he's a hero. But now I meet hero architects sometimes, like Atelier Bow Wow. See, that's Crazy Cat. I researched this very carefully to make sure I had very classic cartoons as well as trendy ones. I think the one thing we didn't solve was how to clean the roof after it rains. But these kind of details and lighting are very important in architecture. Mind you, of course, I'm not an architect. We continue now. The next video is called the Yin Yang. It was done actually in a building of Stephen Hall. There's a certain percentage for art. We'll just play it. It's actually my parody of Bill Viola, A New Age Religion, which is very prominent. Leeson does it. Bill Viola does it. And in the 90s, everything was New Age. In fact, as a parody, I have a new foundation, Jews for Buddha. This perforated metal was actually Stephen Hall's idea. It kind of ruins the piece. It's a leftover space, and the interesting thing is, it's MIT. These are students of mathematics and physics, and 50% are Chinese or Chinese American. So when they saw the yin yang, they got very angry. They said, "Why go back to old religious things in China?" So finally, to get acquainted with the work, they put little rubber duckies in the water.
Yin Yang was conceived in the mid-90s as a kind of send-up and parody of New Age religion, which was very prominent in the 90s. I think the 80s were about greed is good, capitalism, and the 90s everything was about kind of New Age pieties. Many people became Buddhists. A certain prominent video artist was very involved with a kind of corporate New Age Zen Buddhism, sponsored by Sony. And my piece actually was finally realized in an MIT dormitory by architect Stephen Hall, which is about, student-wise is about 50% Chinese and Chinese American students. So the piece actually is a water yin on one side, and the yang is a white gravel, which is a kind of a Zen Buddhist garden without the rocks. So as I've simplified it, it might be a little like an aquarium actually. It's very much relative to the sun, which is available on both sides through the windows, and as the sun changes, the relative transparency as against reflectiveness of the two-way mirror glass changes. You see, I use two-way mirror glass differently from corporations. In corporations, it's like a surveillance situation. It's reflected on the outside.
See, two-way mirror glass, when corporations use it, in the inside you can look outside without being seen.
Illuminates it.
And on the outside, you just see a mirror image of nature. So it's the beginning of surveillance, even though it's ecologically efficient.
The environment. So the idea is it reflects the sun away, cuts down air conditioning costs, and the outside of the two-way mirror glass looks like the sky. Corporations identify themselves with the environment. And on the inside, it was transparent. People can look outside but not be seen, like a surveillance camera. What I do is I make it both transparent and reflective at the same time. I think my work relates a lot to Hudson River School, church, Pierstock.
Church, they were called the Luminists, and Church's teacher was Thomas Cole, who was British. A close friend of John Martin, one of my favorite artists of the 19th century. It's a very small piece, by the way. It's a leftover space that Stephen Hall didn't know what to do, how to deal with in the plan for the building. It's a dormitory. The funniest thing is I was looking at all the dormitories at MIT, and there was the Alvarado dormitory, and there was another dormitory where there was a shrine in the toilet. It is full of filth, old newspapers, and it's dedicated to Elvis, who died on the toilet. I guess that's collegiate humor, right? And the last piece I'm going to show is a piece I did for the 100th birthday of the architect Giuseppe Turani, Italian architect, and his most famous building is Casa de Fascio, The work it was documented as part of a DVD made to go with a book published by Charta of the project. Unfortunately, it's not there anymore. It was blown away by wind because it's a historic square, so it was on marble, and you'll see one side is curved. Two sides are curved. That reflects the Duomo. In other words, the main church, and the other sides are the two other sides are rectilinear. I called the piece "Half Square, Half Crazy." An old girlfriend of mine said my titles are pretty boring, so I think this maybe describes me when it was a kind of unsure teenager that was half square and half crazy. So we'll put on the video. It's professionally made. The other videos I kind of made myself.
My work often involves humorous parody. Here, the title could relate to myself when I started making art. Half square, half crazy. Or it could relate to the square, the piazza on which it sits, or to the casa itself, the two anamorphic sides, or to the crazy reflections. I started using the curve in my models in the mid-'80s and in full-scale architectural works like the two-way mirror cylinder inside cube for the Dia Foundation in 1990. I did want to break with the rectilinear forms of minimal art and the corporate office buildings of the 80s, which used neo-30s, neo-classical forms.
The one thing about the Dia is the cylinder comes from the water tower, because every rooftop in New York has a cylinder water tower.
The curved sides echo the Duomo, while the two regular sides of the pavilion mirror the exterior of the casa. Children love it because it's like a hall of mirrors. They can see an enlarged reflection of themselves. Older women prefer the inside, which is convex.
That's a mistake. It's the opposite. They like to be on the convex side where they become thin. Okay, thanks. And now I'll take a few questions. Yes.
Right, can you tell us a bit about what you're working on at the moment?
Actually, very little, because there's very little interest in my work. Basically, writings, a book of my religion has come out again, but I also have another 500-page book of other writings called Nuggets. I'm going to do a show in DuPont Museum in Tilburg where they have some work of mine, which would be one large piece. And I'm going to try again to show those early architecture models, which nobody knows anything about. I'm trying to get work in museums because no museums own work of mine anywhere in the world. So and I'm trying also to have MoMA do take my archives, but there's no interest at the moment. So I'm kind of a struggling older artist who doesn't have much success. But on the other hand, I love writing. I wake up early in the morning and I write about art, but I'm not doing a memoir. It's basically about other artists who I think people misunderstand. I think John Chamberlain is one of the most important conceptual artists I know. But his work is just, what you see in museums, is just one standard work of everybody. My problem is my work is too diverse, and I always give up doing things once I've made a few examples. In other words, I don't have a trademark. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit more about why you are so interested in children and how they interact with your work?
Well, first, I'm afraid of children. Secondly, my mother was an educational psychologist, and she worked with children. And also, I didn't realize children like to work, but I realized that's a way to sell the work, but by saying it's for children. Interest. Well, maybe I'm an Aries, so we're the infinite of the zodiac. Yes.
What if you be so kind as to explain what you mean to you by the word hybrid?
It means something that's in between two things at the same time.
And you think your work is
Well, I've done many different kinds of work, and they're all hybrid works. I don't believe many artists now are becoming architects. Bullshit. And many architects say they're artists. That's ridiculous. Ambiguity is very important. There was a very famous writer, critic, a literary critic Epson, who had a book called 4 Types of Ambiguity. But I think art is about ambiguity. In fact, my architect, Graham Hayward, says the same thing.
I found it very beautiful, that last object and bit of sculpture that you had on the Piazza del Popolo.
Mm-hmm.
But I found it much more easy to understand the Raphaels in the cathedral than yours.
Well, it's a public plaza. In other words, what we've been doing in the art field in the last 15 years is public projects. So that's the name of the game. I'm not getting them anymore now. They go to Eliasson, they go to Liam Gillick, and then now they're going to Thomas de Man. But it's a challenging area because you have to deal with government, existing monuments, and the flow of people in a public square. But I guess I actually went to Rome for the first time in many years, and I saw Caravaggio. He did that in a very good way. Not Caravaggio, I saw Bernini.
Yes.
But I'm not a sculptor. Maybe I don't understand Bernini, but I think he has architectural elements.
Yes.
Yes?
Simple question. Do you use glass manufacturers to make your works? Do you have someone that you use on a permanent basis?
What?
Glass manufacturers? Who makes your works?
My work, I have 2 architects. I have no studio. I live in a very cheap, until 15 years ago I had a $450 apartment. I have a very small place where I live with my wife. It's barely adequate. And I have 2 architects. One is in Antwerp and part of the time in Lisbon. We like to go on architecture trips for fun. And another architect who lives in Berlin. I send them things by fax, sometimes email. They come up with a plan. I go to the site. They show me the different kinds of glass, and they do the piece.
So they have people they work with, and they will.
No, they're architects. They design the piece. They oversee the construction. And that's about it. I have nobody working for me.
Because I was wondering, they're quite heavy structures, and then there must be transportation costs when they're exhibited in other parts of the world.
I used to travel everywhere because I'm an architecture tourist. I love going to Japan to see the great Japanese architect, Shinohara and Maki. But in fact, site visit is very important. But basically, the government. All my works have to do with European socialism. I was a big Mitterrand fan, and Norway has an amazing government where the money goes, socialist, the money goes for education for children. But at the moment, I've really lost out to these new artists who've gone to goldsmiths, and they've read a lot of books, and they're much more popular than I am. So whatever comes up, I try to do. I'm like an architect, in whatever comes into the semi-office, I try to do. I've even done some very bad corporate projects. The last one I did that was very good was actually Novartis, the big drug company. I was hired to do a piece, and I worked with a great landscape architect, Gunter Voigt, who, by the way, designed the birches in front of the Tate Modern. And I may have a project in the roof of the Metropolitan Museum of Art through an old friend, Sheena Wagstaff, but I think it's going to be turned down because they really prefer young artists and maybe Jeff Koons. But although I like Jeff Koons' work, although it's not so good as it used to be, they want something now that relates to the collection. So I have a triangular circular cutouts, which relates to the Chinese moon gate, because they have a Chinese garden there. And also I want to do a collage, and she wants to do something about gardening. Very hard to do on the roof of the Met, but I'm going to hire Gunter Voigt and I to do a collaboration. I think I'll lose out, because I lose out on almost all my projects. But it's worth trying.
When you conceive your works, do you take in mind, or do you keep in mind the statics of how they would stand, having been, or do you take advice of that as well?
Well, no, actually, my architects do that. But also, what I try to do with my architects is, since the work is child-friendly, I made sure that the framework it's brushed stainless steel, and secondly, it's rounded, so there are no sharp edges.
Yeah.
But they do all that on their own. In fact, sometimes they never see pieces. But I'm doing so few things now. Generally, I have about 100 different things. When I made sketches, but they're always turned down. When I did my Whitney show, I was going to do 6 pieces at the Bronx Botanical Garden. I had the architects come over, ready to go, and they said, no, we won't do it. And generally, everything I do is turned down. And they now really love Liam Gillick. Yes, he's an Aries like me. He studied my work, but in fact, what he talks about, he's actually a corporate he's corporate. All his work goes into corporations. So all this idealistic spiel he does is actually bullshit.
So you actually have to modify a lot, or?
Well, no, he's a very dashing guy. He went to art school, Goldsmiths, and he knows how to dress. And he has what they call sex appeal. Although my wife, who's 44, says he's not that sexy, but older women think he is. Anyway, one more question? Yes.
So, when you saw some architecture done by Japanese architects that you just mentioned, how did they attract you? How did they draw your attention? What kind of aspect of architecture you saw? Like function or high beauty or some other things?
No, it's my hobby. I discovered first there are many Japanese magazines are available, and since I had friends in Los Angeles, I loved Japanese architecture. When I first was in Japan 35 years ago with the Japan Foundation, I gave out my business card to a young 20-year-old girl whose birthday is close to mine, and she next time I came to Japan, she was my guide. I told her what I wanted to see. I saw Shinohara's Centennial Hall masterpiece. Last time I had a show in Japan. I went inside one of his houses. I went to the Museum of Fruit of Hasegawa. It was a long trip, but in Japan you need somebody to guide you, and we became architecture tourists. I know Sejima, according to Wikipedia, she takes all her ideas from me. She's a really bad architect. Toyoichi is a very nice guy, but he's quite not a good architect. And this guy called Fujimoto, who's pretty amazing. He was a theorist. I still think it's the best art, and I love Atelier Bauer. Yashi, when he's in New York, stays with me. I discovered, I was in a conference called Informal Architecture in Banff, and I discovered the work. I said it comes out of Shinohara, Venturi, recently in Emilio Lombas. I was honored to meet Cedric Price just before he died. But of course, I'm a fan. And architects are fans of artists. So now I've been doing a lot of trading with architects. I have Atelier Bauer and Hasegawa drawings. Okay, are you Japanese?
Yes.
From which city?
Tokyo.
Oh, Tokyo. Well, Atelier Bauer, their own house is in a really remote part of the suburbs. They're very modest. And Yashi just loves animals, dogs. He goes to pet stores all the time. And Momaya actually used to be a drummer. But Maki is still doing great buildings, even though he's corporate. We love him in America. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.